A few summers ago, I got invited, along with my boyfriend's family, for a reunion trip up in Ontario. His dad's side of the family had all pitched in to rent a big condo for a week. It was kind of a big deal, because his dad doesn't usually spend time with his relatives. He only really speaks to one of his 3 sisters, and even that relationship is a little rocky, but his mum talked him into going. And since I'd been dating my boyfriend long enough, I got to come along. By then, I was basically treated like part of the family. The condo itself was tucked away in a quiet area, surrounded by thick brush and tall trees on 3 sides. Out front, there was a dirt road that almost nobody drove down, and past that, a stretch of water you could see from the porch. It was peaceful, the kind of spot where you could sit for hours without hearing anything but birds and the occasional boat out on the lake. One afternoon, after what felt like the 3rd trip to the beach that day, I'd had enough sun. My boyfriend felt the same. So, when everyone else packed up and headed down there, we stayed back. We sat on the porch with some cold drinks, just talking about nothing in particular. I remember I had just finished the Harry Potter books, and we were laughing about which characters annoyed us the most. It was one of those lazy summer moments where time drags in a good way. That's when she appeared. Out of nowhere, a woman came stumbling out of the trees near the side of the condo. She wasn't just passing through. She looked desperate, like she'd been walking for miles. She was pale, hair messy, only one sandal on, and she clutched a baby so tightly against her chest that the poor kid was fussing from how hard she was holding him. My stomach dropped the second I saw her. My boyfriend didn't hesitate. He got up right away and went toward her, asking if she was all right. I hung back, frozen, because something about the whole thing felt dangerous. But when she got closer, it was clear she was barely holding it together. Her voice cracked as she told us her boyfriend had been drinking heavily for a long time and had turned violent. He hated that she spent so much attention on her baby, especially since it wasn't his child. That day, while she was driving him home, he'd snapped. He yanked the booster seat out and threw it out the car window, while the baby was still in the back. Then he started hitting her. She managed to stop the car, grab the baby, and run. She hadn't finished telling us the story before yelling broke out from the trees. A man came stumbling after her. He was trying to play it cool, saying things like, "There you are. Let's go home." But his voice was slurred, his eyes were mean, and he could barely stand upright. The whole act of being calm wasn't fooling anyone. I braced myself because my boyfriend is not the type to fight. He's always been laid back, tries to keep peace, avoids confrontation whenever he can. But that day, it was like something in him flipped. He's a big guy, 6'3", broad shoulders, built like he'd been training for football, even though he never actually played. And he walked straight up to the man and blocked his way. He told him flat out, "Don't come closer." His voice was shaking a little, but there was this edge to it I'd never heard before. The man tried to brush him off, saying he was just going to take her home, but my boyfriend stood his ground. When the man tried stepping round him, he blocked him again, this time pushing him back a little with one hand. He said something along the lines of, "You're not going near her or that baby, so turn around and leave." The way he said it made me feel like if the guy made one wrong move, things would get violent fast. For a second, the guy just stared up at him. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'6" or 5'7", and next to my boyfriend, he looked small and sloppy. He muttered something I couldn't make out. But later, my boyfriend told me he had threatened to come back with a gun and kill both of us if we got in his way again. At the time, my boyfriend didn't flinch. He just told him to leave. The man hesitated, pointed at us, and then turned and walked back toward the trees. The woman was sobbing, the baby screaming, and I realized my hands were shaking too. My boyfriend hadn't thrown a punch, but I could tell he was ready to, if it had gone any further. We brought the woman inside, called the police, and did our best to calm her down until help came. Later that evening, we drove her to her sister's place where she'd be safe. We didn't hear much about her after that, but eventually my boyfriend told me she had gotten married to someone else, had another child, and was living a much better life. As for us, the reunion went on like nothing happened. People argued about little family things. Kids ran round, and the whole trip ended up being fun overall. Back when I was around 14, just starting high school, I was living in a small town in southern Germany. My dad had worked there for a few years, so my family ended up moving with him. Overall, it wasn't a bad experience, but there were some moments that left an impression on me. One of the bigger challenges was the school situation. Most schools were far from where we lived, some nearly 2 hours away. But I got lucky and landed in an American-style school that was just under an hour's bus ride from our house. The catch was I had to wake up before sunrise to catch the public bus. And because the return schedule was so sparse, I usually didn't make it home until the evening. During most of the year, it was fine. But winter was when things started to feel different. The area was popular with wealthy Russian families who traveled all the way there for skiing. It blew my mind that they drove across Europe just to spend the winter in the Alps. But apparently that was a normal thing for them. Their kids stood out from the locals in every way, not just the clothes and cars, but their behavior too. Groups of Russian teens were constantly hanging around, drinking, causing trouble, and clashing with the local German kids. It was amusing at first, but sometimes it got a little tense. One morning in December, I caught the usual early bus to school. Most of the students were either half asleep or desperately cramming for exams, and since it was winter break soon, everyone just wanted the week to be over. About 10 minutes into the ride, at one of the smaller stops, a black SUV came screeching to a halt right by the bus stop. The door flung open, and half a dozen teenagers jumped out. They were blasting rap music so loud it rattled their car, and they had Russian plates on the vehicle. Each of them was wearing a different colored tracksuit, like some strange parody of a boy band or a knockoff gang from a movie. They climbed onto the bus, and the driver spoke with them in broken German for a moment before waving them through without tickets. They headed straight for the back of the bus, where my classmates and I were sitting. One of them, in a bright blue tracksuit, noticed the book I was reading and tried saying something to me in Russian. I shook my head and answered in German that I didn't understand. He pointed at my backpack, repeated the same word, and I just kept responding the same way until he got bored. The group passed by, but the one in black lagged behind. He had this angry, restless energy, shoving his friend's shoulder as he moved down the aisle, glaring at everyone in his path. The rest of the ride, I could hear them talking quickly in Russian. I couldn't make out a single word, but I could tell from their tone that they were worked up about something. Everyone else tried to ignore them, and I buried myself back into my book, though I couldn't help glancing back every now and then. Black seemed to be arguing with the others the whole way. When the bus finally reached the last stop, we all got off and started walking the short trail through the woods that led to the school. I was cold and eager to get inside, so I pushed ahead of the group. At some point, I noticed the Russians weren't far behind me, smoking and laughing like they didn't notice the freezing air. The crunch of their boots on the snow followed me until one of them suddenly started running. Before I even had time to react, an arm hooked around my neck from behind. It was the guy in blue, pulling me into a chokehold. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. The others gathered around, and Black stepped forward with a switchblade in his hand. It was absurdly big, the kind of knife you'd expect to see in a movie rather than on a frosty German morning. He waved it around, shouting something in Russian while grinning like he was putting on a show. I couldn't breathe properly with Blue's arm around my throat, and I had no idea what was happening or what they wanted from me. Black got close enough to press the blade near my face before suddenly slipping it back into his jacket. Just like that, the whole mood shifted. Blue let go. Everyone started clapping and laughing, and Black slapped me on the shoulder like we were friends. He handed me a cigarette and gave me a quick hug, as if the whole thing had been a game. I didn't know what else to do, so I weakly muttered spasibo, the only Russian word I knew. They kept cheering until a campus security guard started heading our way, drawn by the noise. In an instant, the whole group bolted back into the woods, still laughing. The guard walked me to the school office, and after I told them what happened, the staff basically shrugged it off. They told me to go home and rest. Later that day, my mum nearly lost her mind when I told her the story. She called the police and the school multiple times, furious that no one had taken it seriously. That night, the local news ran a piece about a group of Russian teens who had tried to rob a grocery store using a toy gun. They showed a mugshot of one of them. Sure enough, it was Black, wearing the same ridiculous sunglasses he'd had on that morning. In the end, my family pressed charges, and the courts discovered Black had been tied to some bigger crimes, including drug trafficking. He was supposed to get prison time, but political interference meant things got complicated, and I never found out what ultimately happened to him. Some of the others just had to pay fines. The whole experience stuck with me, though, especially how quickly something that started like a joke could have turned into something worse. Back in the summer of 2017, a big group of us decided to rent a house for the weekend to celebrate a friend's birthday. There were probably 12 or 13 of us altogether, and we found this place out by a lake near Shelton, Washington. The house itself sat a little above the water with a big deck, and down a hill, there was a small pier where we hung out during the day. A separate garage had been converted into a little sleeping area, and that's where I ended up crashing with a couple other friends since the main house was packed. The first day was exactly what you'd imagined from a group like that. Grilling outside, way too much drinking, people going in and out of the water, and plenty of late-night card games. By the time it hit 2 o'clock in the morning, most of us were completely wiped out. A few people managed to grab couches and mattresses in the house, but plenty had to settle for the floor. In the garage, we pushed a few beds together and called it good. Sometime around 3:30, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I got up quietly, pulled on some pants, and as I was heading out, I noticed movement outside the window. Under the streetlight, I could make out a long, slow shadow of someone walking past. At first, I brushed it off as just a late-night dog walker, or maybe a neighbor. When I got to the main house, I realized the front door wasn't locked. That caught me off guard. But I figured with so many people in and out all night, it could have easily been overlooked. Inside, I found one of my friends sitting up in the dark living room, scrolling through his phone with that half-asleep, hungover look. He looked surprised to see me and whispered, "Wait, weren't you just in here?" I shook my head and told him I just walked in from the garage. He glanced toward the hallway, looking uneasy, and asked if anyone else from the garage had come over. I told him no. Everyone was still asleep. He looked unsettled but dropped it. So I went to the bathroom and then headed back out, locking the door behind me this time. The next morning, everyone gathered in the kitchen for breakfast, and while we were swapping stories, another couple mentioned something weird. They said that in the middle of the night, the bedroom door they were sleeping behind slowly creaked open, like someone had pushed it. But when they looked, nobody was there. They thought maybe it was from a draft, but the only open window in the house was a cracked one in the kitchen, nowhere near their room. The friend I'd spoken to in the living room perked up when they mentioned the timing. He asked what time they thought the door opened, and they said it was somewhere around 3:30. That was exactly when I had seen the shadow outside, and exactly when he swore he saw me walking through the house. Hearing those details all lined up gave everyone this cold, nervous silence. Later in the day, someone pulled up a local post that had been circulating online about a guy sneaking into homes in the area over the past few months. He wasn't a burglar in the traditional sense. From what people said, he was more of a creep who would quietly break in just to watch women while they slept. That hit us hard, because while nothing actually happened to us, the combination of the shadow, the unlocked door, my friend seeing me in the living room, and the couple's door swinging open started to feel way too connected. We never filed a report since we didn't have any proof beyond a bunch of drunk 20-somethings piecing memories together. But looking back on it, I can't shake the thought that the guy might have slipped inside that night. None of us were armed. There wasn't a security system, and if he really wanted to, he could have done a lot more than just scare us. I still remember this trip like it happened last year. My ex and I had been together for a couple years, but never managed to take more than a quick weekend away. So, when I realized my vacation days were about to expire, I pushed us to actually go somewhere decent. The problem was we didn't have passports, and since the decision was made at the last minute, our options were limited. I was poking around for places we could reach without that hassle, when I learned that Puerto Rico didn't require one. That alone was a win. But what sealed the deal was that my ex knew a guy who rented out a place just a few blocks from the beach. Suddenly, we had ourselves a plan. San Juan was the first stop when we landed, and I'll admit, driving out toward our rental was eye-opening. I had this picture in my head of postcard beaches and colorful houses, but what we found was a little different. A lot of neighborhoods we passed looked pretty run down, and plenty of homes were abandoned. Neither of us spoke more than a few basic words in Spanish, and the roads didn't have clear signs, so we relied heavily on GPS. The house itself sat on one of the better streets compared to what we just driven through, though there were still some burned-out homes not too far away. Every window had bars, which the owner explained was just the way things were around there. The driveway had a locking gate, and he emphasized we should keep it closed and locked whenever we were inside. It wasn't the warmest welcome, but we weren't about to waste the whole trip sulking. The rental was technically a studio, but it felt more like a tiny one-bedroom with construction happening on part of the house. It wasn't fancy, but at $200 for the week, it was hard to complain. The only real downside was that the air conditioning wasn't working, which in that climate was brutal. Still, we shrugged it off, unpacked, and decided to focus on enjoying what time we had. The next couple of days, we managed to get a rhythm, walking to the beach, finding a grocery store nearby, hanging out at a small surf bar that became our regular spot, even catching some live music. At that point, things were going smoothly enough. It wasn't until the third night that things got strange. We'd spent the whole day exploring the rainforest and came back wiped, cooked a simple dinner, and sat out on the patio. My ex wanted to stay inside and catch up on emails, but I felt restless. The moon was full, and the idea of a late-night walk to the beach sounded perfect. I grabbed one of those local beers, locked the gate behind me like we were told, and strolled down the quiet street. Half a block away, I noticed a guy standing by a car with the door open. I assumed it was his and kept walking. When I looked back a moment later, he wasn't rummaging anymore. He was just standing there looking at me. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out his face, but I caught the outline of his white shirt in the dark. I tried to shake it off and headed down toward the sand. When I reached the beach, I stood on the grassy patch near the palms, drinking my beer and letting the breeze cool me down. That's when I realized the man had followed me. He was standing in the distance at the end of the street, not moving, just facing my direction. I didn't want to make it obvious I'd seen him, so I kept pretending to look out at the ocean. For several minutes, it was like this weird standoff where neither of us moved. My chest tightened, and I told myself to stay near light, so I casually walked back toward a street lamp up ahead. When I glanced again, he was gone. For a second, I felt stupid for worrying. I even called my ex to laugh it off. But while I was on the phone, I noticed him again. This time he was inside the doorway of an abandoned house at the end of the block, just barely visible. As soon as I stopped walking, he stepped backward into the dark interior until I couldn't see him anymore. My stomach dropped. I turned toward another street, pretending I was just out for a longer walk, but my pace quickened. My ex was still on the line and could tell from my voice that I was rattled. When I turned the corner, I risked a glance back, and there he was again. He'd left the ruined house and was moving my way. Not running, not calling out, just closing the distance. I hung up and broke into a sprint. The sound of barking dogs from one of the houses made my heart nearly explode. But I kept going. I didn't stop until I was through the gate of our rental, locking it fast and checking every corner of the yard before slipping inside. My ex's face told me how bad I looked. We spent the rest of the night inside with the blinds drawn, listening for footsteps that never came. We didn't see him again during the trip, and the rest of the vacation ended up being fine. But the memory of that man in the white shirt silently shadowing me through unfamiliar streets has never really left. Back when I was a kid in the mid-90s, my family decided to take a trip to Cancun. My parents thought it would be this big bonding vacation. But, of course, my older brother and I had other plans. He was 18 at the time. I was 13, and the age gap made all the difference. He was just old enough to get into bars and clubs, while I was stuck hanging back at the hotel. We were sharing a room, so most nights he'd head out while I was left flipping through TV channels or wandering around the resort feeling bored out of my mind. By the third or fourth day, I was feeling extra restless. I wanted so badly to be out doing something more exciting, but I was too young to tag along with my brother and too stubborn to hang out with my parents. One afternoon, I was sitting at the hotel bar sipping a Shirley Temple, trying to look older than I was, when this woman sat down a couple of stools away. She was stylish, maybe in her late 20s, and for whatever reason, she started talking to me. I don't remember every word of the conversation, but I do remember how she made me feel, like I wasn't just a kid, like she actually cared what I had to say. She suggested we meet again the next day, and I agreed right away. The following afternoon, we met up in the resort's lounge. I complained to her about being too young to do anything fun, and she was sympathetic in a way that flattered me. She offered to get me drinks, since the bartender obviously wasn't going to card her, and I couldn't believe my luck. 13-year-old me thought screwdrivers were the ultimate grown-up drink, so I downed a few. Before long, I was tipsy and laughing and feeling like the coolest kid in Cancun. That S when she leaned in and asked if I wanted to head back to her room to watch a movie and hang out. To my drunk teenage brain, this was like winning the lottery. More alcohol, attention from someone older, and the chance to sneak off without my parents knowing. I was all for it. We started leaving the lounge together, and right as we were walking out, my mum appeared. She was on her way to meet my dad by the pool, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect or, for me at the time, more disastrous. I proudly introduced my new friend and explained we were going to her room to watch a movie. The look on my mum's face changed in an instant. She went from smiling to deadly serious, and without raising her voice, she told me to get upstairs to my room immediately. Then she turned to the woman and told her flat out that she had no business hanging around with a kid, and if she tried it again, she'd be dealing with the police. I remember being furious at my mum in that moment, embarrassed too. But the way she looked at me left no room for argument. The next day, I was on my way out to the pool when I spotted that same woman sitting at the bar again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Two older men, definitely much older than her, probably late 50s, were with her. The three of them were drinking, and as I walked past, she pointed me out. One of the men narrowed his eyes at me in a way that made my stomach sink, and the other just gave me a slow, deliberate wink. I kept moving, pretending not to notice, but it made my skin crawl. Looking back, I realized just how bad that situation could have gone if my mum hadn't stepped in. At 13, I thought I was just having fun and being treated like an adult. But the whole thing was a setup. I was too young to see for what it was. This happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Sometime in the early 2000s, my parents had taken me and my sister on a family trip to the Caribbean. And it was one of those vacations where you're living in complete comfort inside the resort. But the moment you step outside, you notice how different the actual island is. The resort itself was stunning. Palm trees, white sand, fancy pools. But when we drove outside those gates, the reality was a lot rougher. There were small, patched-up houses, dusty streets, and people just trying to get by. At that age, I didn't fully understand it, but I could sense that outside the resort felt like an entirely different world. A few nights in, my parents signed us up for a sunset cruise that left from a marina about 30 minutes away. We climbed onto a shuttle bus along with another family and drove through neighborhoods that were nothing like the carefully landscaped paradise we'd been staying in. I remember staring out the window at dry, barren land, and these little houses that looked almost handmade from bits of wood and scrap metal. It stuck with me because of how different it felt compared to the endless flowers and fountains back at the resort. The boat ride itself was amazing. The crew pointed out birds and sea creatures, shared little bits of history about the island, and even played music as the sun went down. By the time we made it back to shore, it was really late. Maybe 11 at night, and I was completely wiped out. When the boat docked, I hopped off before my parents, just wanting to get to the van that had brought us. The docks were brightly lit, but as soon as I turned the corner toward the parking area, it was like stepping into pitch black. My eyes struggled to adjust, and I was trying to figure out if our shuttle was even parked there, when a hand clamped down on my shoulder. A man's voice barked out, asking who I came with. His tone was sharp, not like someone being friendly or helpful. I froze and tried to explain that I was waiting for my family, but he interrupted me and said I came with him and needed to follow him to his car. He started pulling me deeper into the dark parking lot, and for a moment I didn't fight it because I was raised to listen to adults. But then I noticed the car he was dragging me toward. It was a small sedan way too tiny to be the van we had arrived in. And that's when alarm bells went off in my head. I dug my feet into the ground and tried to pull away, but his grip was strong. I was about to scream when the parking lot suddenly lit up with bright floodlights. At that same moment, my parents and the other group turned the corner, talking loudly. The guy immediately let go of me like he'd been caught red-handed. I looked up at his face, and it's something that stayed burned into my memory. Bald head, scars across his cheek, and this stunned look like he hadn't realized people were right behind me. One of the marina staff called out to him, and he just raised his hands as if to say, "No problem," before walking off quickly toward the darker end of the lot. I stood there in shock until my parents reached me, and on the ride back, my dad asked me what that guy wanted. I was young enough that I didn't fully process it, so I told him maybe the guy thought I had gotten into the wrong car, or that I was lost. My dad seemed satisfied with that answer, and we never really talked about it again. Years later, though, I realized how dangerous that moment could have been. It wasn't just some guy confused about shuttles. He was trying to lure me into his cars. And if those lights and my parents hadn't shown up right then, things could have ended very differently.